Okay, it's day 15. We're live from the Capitol, and of course, right over here, we've got the Cannon office building, Longworth office building, and then Rayburn, where Peter Strzok, or Peter Strokes, is currently testifying. So let's walk that way, and as we do, let's take a nice gentle stroll and recap everything we know about this person that's doing the takedown of Trump, okay? Trump has been vetted quite a bit. We know about every year of Trump's existence, right, from the time he was a little baby. So probably that's a good vetting process for the person who wants to take him down. So let's go through that. Well, let's start with his potential father, or it could be his uncle, which is also a guy also named Peter Paul Strokes Sr. Now, I don't know too many people who name themselves Peter Paul Strokes Sr. if they don't have a son named Peter Paul Strokes Jr. But be that as it may, let's just say that's his uncle. We know his uncle goes to Iran in 1965. And by his own words, we know his uncle is involved in shipping farm implements on military planes for humanitarian aid. And we know that that's sometimes used as a humanitarian cover to ship weapons. So that's our start. So we don't have to go any deeper than that. We'll just now move on to Peter Strokes Jr. And again, I don't know why he would call himself Junior if his father wasn't Senior, but again, no one has asked him about his family yet today. But let's just go on the 1970 being his birth year and March 6th being his birth date. No, it's actually not the Ides of March. It's one day later, March 7th. So let's establish that as fact, okay? Again, any attorney would normally read somebody into the record. Hey, tell me where you're born and what day you were born, what hospital were you born, just to make sure that you're getting solid data. And I think that is worthwhile to ask, where were you born? You know, what hospital? I remember where I was born, October 12th, 1960, Mount Sinai Hospital, Cleveland, Ohio. Easy. That's an easy thing. That's not going to endanger any national investigation, right? So that's the first question out of the way. Well, what's the next thing we know? Well, the next piece of information that we really have about Peter Strzok comes in when his father or his uncle comes back to the United States in 1983, he's involved in Catholic Family Services. His brother, Jim Strokes, is in Nairobi. Okay, and this is by their own words, not mine. And he moves from whatever he was doing in Iran. Again, he, by his own words, says he was working with different tribes in that area, and he's sending farm implements. He loves sending farm implements. In 1983, we also know Peter Strokes' own words, we moved 500,000 people into Iraq. Okay, I'm sorry, that's later, 2003. We'll leave that farm implements story for 2003. Remember though, we're not going to skip 2003. So Peter Strzok is about 13 years old. Again, this is tentative, and we think that he goes back to St. Cloud, Minnesota, right, where he goes to school at St. John's Preparatory School. Now that would be here, obviously we have the work on the building there with the Cannon office building, Longworth office building, and now we're walking in front of where Peter Strzok's testifying right now. It's really quite the circus, so I don't think it's really worthwhile, but I'll put it in the background. Remember, I reversed this camera angle so that Rahm Emanuel can enjoy this if he's riding in the back of, if he's driving an ambulance trying to get out of Washington, D.C. So 1983, we think he goes to St. John's Preparatory School in Collegeville, Maryland. Again, no one has asked him this question. I would ask him the question just to get to know him, right? So the beautiful view of the Capitol behind us, okay? The next date that's of interest, again on the timeline, we don't know when he graduates from high school. We have a yearbook picture. I believe the yearbook picture, now I want to say, is 1992. But let me check that. That wouldn't be right. That would be 1988. It would be his graduation picture. But in 1987, interestingly enough, Jim Strzok takes Barack Obama back to his ancestral homeland in Kenya. Of course, that makes sense. He's a missionary in Kenya, in Nairobi, and Tanzania. He's working with all these tribes, speaks these languages. Again, often used as a cover, humanitarian aid, often used as a cover for the CIA for toppling governments and so forth, and using your gang to kind of establish resources. We know that there's a long history of that with Kagame in Rwanda. So we'll keep that in the back of our mind as we get into the 90s. But supposedly he graduates from St. John's Preparatory School in 1988. Again, interestingly enough, Dennis McDonough comes from that same town, or close to the same town, may have gone to the same school, I think as a graduate of that school. May have been a person in college graduating there. Again, I talked to two St. John's preparatory graduates here, right over there. Okay, Dennis McDonough spoke there this year at the graduation, and he says he graduated from the college at St. John's University in Collegeville, Maryland. Again, not my opinion, it's the opinion of Dennis McDonough. Apparently he's under the impression that he was in college while Peter Strzok was in high school. And again, we're gonna have the lovely Rayburn office building behind us while we do this. Okay, so now let's move on to college. The Dennis McDonough says he goes to Georgetown, which is the Walsh School of Foreign Service, to get his master's degree. I believe Peter Strzok said he went into the Army for 4 years. Okay, so he said he was 4 years in the Army, which would have taken him to the time he was 22, which would have been 1992, okay? So the next year, 1993, and this is a nice little spot right here. I'll move over here on the Capitol so you can get a nice view of the Capitol. 1993, he would have had to go into the FBI, okay? Well, there's a problem with the whole story right there. This is the first point in this story where we end up in some real trouble, because he's not in any of the Academy yearbooks. I asked Robin Gritz about this, FBI agent that had all these struggles with Andy McCabe. She's in the FBI yearbook. She knows who sat next to her, and by alphabetical seating. Peter Strzok hasn't yet named, even though here we are with this massive investigation, has not yet even said the basics of what year he graduated from the FBI Academy. He said he was in the FBI 22 years, but we can't find any documentary evidence of that, which is strange. It's strange that none of the representatives have drilled down on that. It seems like that's a very obvious initial question. Now, we do have a picture. The next picture we have of Peter Strzok is him at the White House down Pennsylvania Avenue, standing with Bill Clinton during the presentation to Brady for the Brady Bill, when the Brady Bill finally passed in 1996. And Peter Strzok standing there sort of looks like a U.S. Secret Service person, kind of standing in the back. That would explain that, because he's only, in 1996, he would be only 26 years old, right? But he could be an FBI person on a security detail. That's possible. But again, you would think we would have a lot of people that would be coming out of the woodwork, like Robin Gritz. She can name 15 people that she went to FBI Academy with right now, and they keep in touch and so forth. And why wouldn't Peter Strzok be the same way? Seems like all of the FBI guys can do that, except one guy, which is Peter Strzok. So now I'm going to enter in one more name from our series that you may not remember. I think we're going to go by the Dennis McDonough bench over here, where I met Dennis McDonough, not too far from here. So we're at 1996. The next case is 1997, where over here, you can't see the FBI building, but over there at DC District Court, there's a lawsuit. And it's a list of 12 people, 12 plaintiffs, DC District, that say that there's this guy named Peter Strzok who's being a real not so nice guy with these polygraphs. He's asking these wacky polygraph questions. And it doesn't seem like those are appropriate for applying to the FBI. So we've got a court case, 1997, with him there. Okay, not me. You can look it up. Just do Strzok polygraph case, 1997. Now we really don't. We've run all the different services, run all the different different finder services and so forth, and we really don't have anything else with Peter Strzok until 2009, which we do have him then being in the FBI at that point. So the only other piece is from 94 to 97, he lived in Tennessee, which is a lot of times where they send FBI folks for 2 years of training for weapons of mass destruction training. They go down there, they do their nuclear time. And if you're managing the nuclear cascade or the nuclear fuel chain, you need to know about how reactors work and how small reactors for the Navy work and what the fuel rods look like and how to test for stuff and the different key components that would signal someone's using contraband to ship parts like A.Q. Kwan did for Pakistan, where different pieces like high-strength aluminum used in making centrifuges. Okay, so that's fine. We know that he was there 2 years with his wife, Melissa Hodgman, and we don't know much more about her other than she is in the SEC, in the enforcement division of SEC. Here's where I met the two kids from St. John's, right over there, the little alcove with JK. So, to me, I need to then start, if there's that sketchy of information, I just start combining the information with other things I know about the 98 White House, where Bill Clinton was. And this has been throughout the series, looking at kind of Hillary kind of preparing for becoming senator in New York, and then on to her, that was a stepping stone, on to her being president. And her sort of establishing these, Podesta sort of establishing these kind of, and this is speculative, but these kind of Pope's assassins, or Pope's red team, if you will, the Pope's red team. And what I mean by that is, again, right here is the place where we met the St. John's kids. We did a live stream with JK. Oops. There we go. Anyway, that's it right there. Got a drink. Get a drink when you're in Washington. And basically, Dennis McDonough was the guy who was saying, there's this guy named Joe Clancy who ran United States Secret Service for a long time, and John Podesta was the chief of staff. Dennis McDonough would then become chief of staff for Barack Obama later on. But we know Dennis McDonough has been involved in all these weapons shipments, right? And it just ties together very closely with the background of the Strokes, beginning in especially the year 2003. Again, the Peter Strzok Sr. says, we moved in all these refugees from all these different places, about 500,000, which is really amazing, a lot of people. And we sent all these farm implements to these young 17-year-olds in a war zone at the beginning of a war in the mountains. Well, it kind of really sounds, and we used military aircraft to send them these farm tractors in the mountains. It kind of sounds like that's actually you're moving a mercenary force in, and you're sending them weapons. And the reason why you're shipping it with a humanitarian cover is so that the enemy doesn't know that they're receiving weapons. It's kind of what it sounds like. So again, Dennis McDonough in 2003 is the working for Senator Daschle, the minority leader, and they hammer out a quick agreement for the use of military force for not only Pakistan, which is no debate, and the Afghanistan, but then also for Iraq. Again, no debate. So he's very key in that at the same time that Strzok is sending these weapons in 2003, the beginning of the Iran-Iraq war. Excuse me, at the end of the Iran-Iraq war in our first incursion in the Gulf War. Okay, so another key date, Be interesting to see if Peter Strzok mentioned that. Now, Peter Strzok spent 4 years in the Army. That would have been, he would have missed Gulf 1. I'm sorry, he might have been involved in, I might have my dates wrong. It might be 2003. Yeah, 2003 is what I said before. But Strzok would have been in the Army between, let's see, 1992 and 96, or he would have been involved in 1988 through 92, which meant he might have been involved in Bosnia, or he might have been involved in one of the Balkans, not the Balkans, one of the Yugoslavia breakups, Montenegro, Croatia, etc. Okay, so I skipped over that. If he was in the White House, if he was in the 96 White House, he could have been, in those next years, been involved in Kosovo, which I believe he was, and then into 2003 with his dad into Iraq. So we don't know any of those things. We don't really know, and it all kind of hinges on when did you graduate from the FBI Academy? Because if you can't tell me exactly when you did it, if you didn't go through the FBI Academy in the 90s, to me what it feels like, and this is speculation now, feels like he was a part of this kind of Secret Service group from 96, 97, 98, 99. But they really weren't Secret Service. They were Secret Service in name only. They were actually just CIA guys who were flying on these helicopters or planes or whatever and flying weapons to these mujahideen, because that's what Bogritz said he did. He trained the mujahideen, and this Task Force Orange, this Army of Northern Virginia, that's what they did. So if you move the mujahideen in and you send them weapons, you're kind of a CIA guy moving weapons into the mujahideen. And I had said this many times before. I thought Peter Strzok was involved in this kind of tight circle here. Now, I don't know when Dennis McDonough actually gets involved in how much he was involved in the first Clinton White House, involved in Bosnia. I don't know how much he was involved in Croatia, Montenegro, Serbia, Kosovo, or any of those engagements. But it feels like he was there. And it would be interesting to see these three, this triumvirate, if you will, of people. Now they are, if you do actually the associations of Peter Strzok, his number one top associate is this Ross Kaiser. And Ross Kaiser is Ross Kaiser Little Birds. Kaiser Little Birds. Kaiser Little Birds are these HU-6 helicopters that are these unmanned helicopters. And what's great about unmanned helicopters is you could, under the auspices of training in the Air Force Base, in an Air Force Base in Nevada, either Creech or Ellis Air Force Base, you could train Egyptian pilots to fly weapons into Libya. You can train Bosnian pilots to fly weapons into Kosovo. You can train Bosnian pilots to fly weapons into Montenegro or Croatia. Now that Croatia's in the championship, maybe some of these guys are kind of the babies of that war. So again, the metadata lines up quite well with a CIA kid with a shiny United States Secret Service badge until 2001. And the metadata really lines up when Obama becomes president and Dennis McDonough becomes chief of staff. And also, Dennis McDonough is the one who did Gulf Tainer. He's the one who's doing these Club K weapons. So he's got this long history of covert weapons, supplying weapons to these tribes in Africa and the Middle East, right, for resource plays and so forth. And I'm sure it's all going to the church. I'm not saying Dennis McDonough is not a very devout person. I'm not saying John Podesta is not a very devout person. I'm not saying money isn't going to the Catholic Church. It is, I'm sure. But again, it's an allegiance beyond the allegiance to the Constitution, which is really, we all take the oath and vow for that. So I'm just walking it through here, just showing how these three amigos, Clancy, well, Podesta, I'd say Clancy would be 4, but Podesta, Dennis McDonough, and Strzok kind of all go together. Now remember, John Podesta is at Georgetown recruiting guys like this, right? So he's the fixer, you know, he's kind of like the Pope's fixer. And, you know, McDonough is kind of his understudy, if you think about it. And not, again, nothing against these guys, and I know they think they're doing the right thing, but covert weapons without the approval of the American people is a no-no. That's why we have the Congress, right? That's why we have the president. And we know, we're not speculating here, and we know that Libya, Sudan, Honduras, Guatemala, Syria, Yemen, were all undeclared wars. All of those were basically chief of staff meeting room, hey, let's do a covert action. So the track record here with Petraeus and all these guys is not very good. And there's a lot more metadata pointing in the direction that Peter Strzok was a part of a task force, which is called the Joint Interagency Task Force, that this military task force kind of turned into, which is called Task Force Orange. There's a lot more metadata out there pointing toward Peter Strzok being involved in something like that, gun running, than there is for him being involved in anything having to do with justice. You don't see his name on any cases. The only case you see him on is the 1997 polygraph case. And if you were getting together a covert team, a red team, you know, the Pope's assassins, God's army, God's Marines, whatever you want to call them, and one of the ways you could put it together was ask him a bunch of embarrassing questions, you know, and on the polygraph. Have you ever, you know, done this? Have you ever done that? Have you ever, you know, all these types of things that are normally out of bounds, out of scope. And then he fails, Strzok fails the polygraph detector test in January 2016. It's the only other real marker we have. 2009, we've got him as an FBI agent. That's fine, I'm all with that. I don't know if he was on Joint Interagency Task Force, National Capital Region or not, NCR or not. But we do have him failing a polygraph test in 2016. So how is the person who's running the national takedown, Trump, failing a polygraph? Why aren't we asking any questions about that? That was January the 13th, 2016. So hopefully with 72 people up there on Capitol Hill, 36 are gonna actually ask real questions, we'll get to some of those questions. But I think the nation owes it. Again, this guy has all these contacts with Egyptian naval commanders, the Mustafa, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, and so forth. He's got all the contacts that you would have if you had a God's army that was supplying weapons covertly to tribes. He doesn't have anything in his background. Before the Hillary case and before the Trump case, nothing, no records. We don't know any cases he was involved in before that. To me, I've got him with Egyptian naval figures. I've got him with different people making these helicopters, different people making these gun magazines and PACOM with Cruise Associates. So until somebody comes out with a better explanation, the more detailed one wins. It's Occam's razor. And you can look everything up I've said and drill down on it. Somebody has to ask Peter Strzok these questions. And they're not out of bounds. Somebody wants to take down the president. We should know all the answers to all those questions. We should have a year-to-year summary of what he did year-to-year in his life. His resume should be way more detailed than just try to get into the FBI, because he's doing two of the largest investigations ever. It should be a year-to-year detailed resume. If you didn't want to ask the question, didn't want to be embarrassing, you just say, hey, Mr. Strzok, would you mind submitting a year-to-year detailed resume of where you've been with the FBI and the Army until this year? That would be how I would handle it if people didn't want to say, where were you born? I would just like to ask those questions individually so you could see the expression on his face, and then also give him the opportunity to perjure himself. But anyway, Cruise Associates, not on my resume. I think it's on his. Kaiser Little Bird Helicopters, I think it's on his resume, not mine. Task Force Orange, I think it's going to be on his resume. Army of Northern Virginia, it's going to be on his resume. Gray Fox, the other name for their unit, their outfit, I think it's going to be on his resume, not mine. So we'll see. Remember, if I have a group doing a set of covert actions, I could have a covert name like Strokes. Just a crazy name, PP Strokes, you know, and my name could be Cartwright. I could be the son-in-law of General Cartwright. Again, how many people do you know whose father-in-law used a cyber weapon to take down 1,000 centrifuges in Iraq, in Iran? That's probably like only one family in the world, and that's Strokes' family, right? How many do you know that have a crane company to move nuclear reactors? I'd say there's probably, I don't know, 20. That's still not a lot. And there's only 100 Strokes in the United States. Is that really kind of a operation name so that when you do a Google search, you only get the, you know, you're only limited to the people that are in your operation to kind of contain the operation? Is that what that's for? I don't know. But we need a year-to-year accounting of his life. Gotta have it. Gotta have it. Somebody should at least say today, Mr. Strokes, is it possible to get a year-to-year resume of every year of your life as part of your testimony? That will include with a transcript. All the Democrats want to put out the transcript, which I agree. I'd love to see the transcript and the questions they're asking, even if it is going to help all the other conspirators to get their story straight, because the transcript will show me whether or not somebody's asked this question or not. And the more that gets put out to the crowd, the internet's always smarter than you, the better. Okay, leave it there.